join me in welcoming her.
I hardly need to introduce Barbara. This looks like a love fest. And why not? Because Barbara, who is my very dear friend, and friend of yours also, has written a book that is a great triumph. And we're going to hear about it tonight. Barbara, in case you don't know, grew up in Southeast Michigan and had a career as a speech and language pathologist. And when you stopped doing that, you turned into a novelist. And this book is not her first. It is the third book that she has written. But it is something that I think you would all get a great deal out of. I certainly did. There are many things in here that you would not know about. If you like history, historical novels, there's that. If you like intrigue, there's that. And if you are into fiber arts, there's a lot of that. And so now I'm going to ask you, Barbara, if you would just tell us briefly the story of this book.
Briefly tell the story. Wow, that's a challenge. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Lucy and also Caitlin Dudek and the Ann Arbor District Library, because it's been a wonderful experience to launch Isabela here, and I really appreciate it. Libraries are wonderful. I support libraries, and particularly this library has been very supportive of me as an author, so thank you. Isabela's Way is the story of a 14-year-old embroideress who has to find her way from 17th century Portugal to Germany, Hamburg, Germany, because of the Spanish Inquisition. Her father has gone to Hamburg to set up his textile business because he already understands that as a new Christian or converso, which is a Jewish person who was required to convert or leave the country or be killed, he realized that even though he did the conversion and became a new Christian and raised his daughter as a good Catholic, that the Inquisition still was persecuting people who were of Jewish heritage and did that conversion. So Isabela believes at the beginning of the book that she has nothing to fear from the Inquisition. She's Catholic. She's been raised as a Catholic until a mysterious woman arrives and has a message from Isabela's traveling father saying that she must leave her home, and she doesn't understand that she will be embroidering her way through Spain and France as part of a clandestine network of sanctuaries created to conduct new Christians or converted Jews to safety. She is relentlessly pursued by a priest who is bent on persecuting all suspected heretics on behalf of the Inquisition. Fortunately, she has a host of supporters and one special young man who assist her and try to keep her safe as she travels. She learns of the danger and the importance of her work only slowly, and is eventually shocked to discover the true origins of her family. So this is a coming-of-age tale. It's a story of resilience, of resistance, of love, of adventure, danger, and of unexpected allies.
Okay, but you did not know anything about this history before you started. Is that right? You really, I mean, we all know about the Spanish Inquisition, but this doesn't even take place in Spain. It's really in Portugal and then in France. So, Barbara, you came to this without any background knowledge. Not true.
Not true. So my grandmother's mother was a Yeshurun, which is a very famous, known Jewish Portuguese family. And I knew that way back when, somewhere, her family were from Portugal. And because I was such a good student, I knew about the Spanish Inquisition, and I put two and two together and figured, there must be a history of my own family with regard to this.
And how did you pursue that, and how did you get into writing this? I mean, it's one thing to know about this, but another thing to do this.
Okay, so why this book and why now? As you will hear later, I didn't really choose this book. Isabela chose me. But once she did, I realized a couple of things. First of all, I seem to gravitate toward writing about how unexpected and sometimes unwelcome things happen in our lives that we can't control, but I'm really interested in how we respond and what we do about it. How we summon resilience, how we lean on our allies, and how we face the world that we have to face in response to that. I also spent 15 years working on the board of Jewish Family Services of Washtenaw County here in Ann Arbor, and that is the primary agency that welcomes refugees into Washtenaw County. So I learned a lot about the refugee experience and the problems and so forth. And then my own parents were both refugees from Nazi Germany. So with the I discovered in my research that my great-grandmother's ancestor was born in the Branch, Portugal in 1586 and died in Hamburg in 1640-something. And so all those things conspired to make me say, and you'll hear about how Isabela came to me.
Okay, so isn't there something about a bike ride in here?
Yeah. So I just want to say one more thing about the refugees, because I had no idea when I started writing this book that our country would get into such a political morass around refugees. I didn't know how much relevance Isabela's story would have with uncertainty and intolerance and trust all being mixed up in that experience that I was writing about. So the reasons that I originally started writing this book are not the reasons that I finished it and really made the choice to bring it into the world. But now that you ask,
Now that I ask.
I have a little slideshow. So it's my show and tell. So it has been my good fortune to be able to travel several times to the sites that became the settings for Isabela's Way. And in 2011, I did a bicycle trip from Lisbon, Portugal, to the Alhambra in Spain, and got my first taste of the countryside, the culture, the tastes, the sights of the Iberian Peninsula. There was a town called Arialush, where they have a long history of artisanship, making needle-pointed carpets, so maybe that got me thinking about fiber arts since I'm interested in that anyway. And Evora was the home to a tribute, a structure to Diana the goddess, and she was the warrior goddess, and I was on a warrior woman bike trip, so maybe that had something to do with it. And then we got to Estremos, which had this amazing larger-than-life statue of Queen Isabela, and she was sainted because she disobeyed her husband, the king. You were not allowed to feed the poor. She fed the poor, and she got caught one day with her basket at the castle gates, and the punishment for feeding the poor with the king's food was death. And when she was accosted and the basket was opened, instead of bread, there were a basket of roses. And that is the miracle for which she was sainted. And I really liked good old Isabela, so maybe that's where that name came from. So we approached another spot, which was a Celtic standing stone circle, and it was quite a climb to get there. And normally I thought Celtic culture kind of stopped in the north of Spain, but no, they got this far down into Portugal. And the doorway of that stone formation, and it was early morning to escape the heat, and the sun was rising over this mountain that I would later have to climb on my bicycle. But the sun came up, and the myth was that as you watched the sun rise, you would be greeted also by your ancestors. And I did know about this ancestor of mine that came from a brunch, which was close by. So I had a bit of a Celtic moment in that stone circle. Well, next was that incredible climb on that mountain to Castello de Vide, which is a gorgeous medieval Jewish town. It was built in the 14th century mostly by Jews, and the gorgeous flowers, the whitewashed walls, the just beautiful wrought iron, the fountains, all of that legacy vanished because of the Inquisition. All of the Jews were expelled or forced to convert. And again, what had originally been just an interesting bike trip to me suddenly got very personal regarding the legacy of these Iberian Jews and my own family. So all of these influences sort of conspired to bring this 14-year-old embroideress into my mind, unbidden, as I cycled through just one beautiful countryside after another, and the idea to write about a girl having to escape the Inquisition and find her way to her father in Hamburg kind of lodged itself in my oxygen-deprived brain. However, I had two other books, one that I was writing furiously and one that was in the pipeline, so Isabela had to wait, and she did. So
Barbara, I mean, I think if I'm traveling on a bicycle where you were climbing up hills, I would be thinking about how sore my tushy is, and you're thinking about how did you do that? I mean, how did she come to you?
You know, John, honest to goodness, I hear about people having these inspirations and characters coming into their mind. That has never happened to me before, and it hasn't happened to me since. It literally, she came into my mind like fully formed, and I don't know how or why. I have no explanation, but I'm very grateful that she did, because I've had a lot of fun with her.
All right, where does the story pick up from there?
So, where does the story pick up from there? So, I made two more trips to Portugal, to Spain, to France, and to Germany. And I wanted to actually trace the route that my characters went from the various places that they started until the places that they ended. So one of the real joys of being an author, and particularly being part of the community of women authors that I've been lucky enough to belong to, is the support and the collaboration and the relationships that I've been able to develop. And so a poet colleague of mine who published her first book of poetry when I published my first novel happened to live in the Pyrenees in France. And she hosted me in, my mother's going to be upset because I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Iroulegui, is that even close? And she hosted me in her beautiful home there. Her husband, Pascal, is a marvelous chef. So it was an amazing experience. And she took me to Bayonne, where I learned about the refugee community of Jews that escaped the Iberian Peninsula and went to France, where they found some safe harbor. And I also found out that they were responsible for bringing the first chocolate to France. So, little known fact. And all of this area became a setting in Isabela's Way. So, other towns that I went to, that I did research with, that I really enjoyed were Porto in Portugal, and Toulouse, and Carcassonne, the garrison town in Carcassonne. And they all became settings as well. So we went on to the northeast of Spain, where and by now I'm with my husband Barry, and he's enjoying all of this good food and travel with me. And we went to the northeast corner of Spain where two of the best chefs that I know invited us to come, one of whom is here in the audience, Elizabeth Jordan. We went to Massanet, and there we bicycled, we shopped in the markets. I got a sense of the food, I got a sense of the flowers, the sights, and the sounds. And aside from the wonderful dinners and the cycling, we visited Besalú and Girona. And my character, Anna Martel Girondi, is from Girona. And Girona has a really rich history of a Jewish presence, and it's also an early seat of the Kabbalah, the Kabbalistics, which is a mystical branch of Judaism. So that was really interesting. And of course, my characters had to have a little touch of that too. All right. So there's Massanet and Girona.
Okay, so here's another pause. Let's make it clear to people who, of course, most of you have not read the book, that, Barbara, these are all way station safe houses along the route from Portugal into France and eventually Germany maybe, and also Italy. Did you know that these safe houses existed when you began thinking this whole thing up, or was this just an invention of yours?
So I know that most of the people who left the Iberian Peninsula left by water and went to the New World, went to Africa, went to different places in Europe by boat. But I surmised that there had to be people who also went overland, and I wondered about whether there was such a network. And I really researched this and found no hard evidence from this century. Now we're talking about the beginning of the 1600s. However, 100 years earlier, there was a magnificent woman who was a very wealthy and influential businesswoman named Gracia Mendez Nasi, and she did, in fact, create such a network. And it was through Spain and into Italy, where Venice was another city that was semi-tolerant of Jews, and so people could establish themselves there. She did that, and then when that became less tolerant, she took a whole community to Constantinople, and then when that became less tolerant, she actually went to Tiberias and restored Sfat, the mystical town of Sfat. So I did have that piece of research, but nothing within the early 17th century.
But did you have that research when you were writing the book, or only later?
Well, I did this early travel, and then came COVID, and so I couldn't travel anywhere. So I did spend a lot of time researching, and that was while I was writing the book. And my writing partners will tell you that I struggled over how to make that believable. But one of the wonderful Kirkus Review lines that Isabela's Way got is that there will always be intolerance, but there will always be heroes who will deal with it. And that's what I decided to go with.
And so, Barbara, I mean, the dynamism or the threat that hangs over the escapees is part of what moves this book.
Yes.
What was that all about? Who's pursuing? Who are can you make that a little more vivid?
So there was kind of a priest who was absolutely obsessed with chasing these two kids, basically, who were escaping and of undermining this network. And he tried every possible way to do it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. And I mean, he's the bad guy, so you had to have bad guy. And there are also some wonderful Catholic clergy that simply don't allow that to happen. So there's some good guys too.
Okay, so there are good guys and bad guys. This slide tells me that there's probably something more coming up.
So down we went to the Camargue, and I fell in love because it is a beautiful coastal marsh near Montpellier, and it has a history of refuge, not only for these beautiful white horses, but for the Roma, who were refugees themselves from persecution. And then from there, we went to Lyon, and my wonderful writing partner, Patty Hoffman, who's here this evening, had visited Lyon and had shared with me her fascination with the traboules. And these were passageways that laced the city and were originally designed to transfer silk from workshops at the edge of the city down to the two rivers that crisscross in Lyon, and thereby being able to be transported to the rest of Europe and around the world. So I became fascinated with the traboules. There's a couple of pictures of them. They're really fascinating, and of course that became also part of the setting for Isabela's Way. And then finally, my own family ended up in Hamburg. That is where my grandmother was born and raised. And so I journeyed there because that is the end point of my story. And it is a city that did allow Jews to settle and allowed them to become economically involved with the city and successful. That is the actual house, which is now like the Liberian embassy or something, that my grandmother was born and raised in Hamburg. And I was able to go to a cemetery that several of my ancestors, not all the way back to the 17th century, but several of my ancestors were buried. So that is my show and tell.
Okay, so I think before we get to we're going to ask you to ask some questions here, but Barbara, this is a very nice idea, and you executed it beautifully, but wasn't it, I mean, I know it's your third try at writing, third novel.
Right.
Easier than the other ones, or?
Oh, good question. So the first of my novels is based on a family story, and 85% of what you will read in Even in Darkness really happened. My second novel, some people who know me well will say might be related to certain people who might be part of my family, although I'm telling you that the main lead is not my husband, Barry. I'm just announcing it right here in public. And this book is really, other than my relatives that I know were born in Portugal and went to Hamburg, totally fictional. So this was both a challenge, but also a delight. It was really fun to be able to do that, to just completely make up a story. I did a ton of research, but it is fictional.
Yeah, so there's another component of this story, which is the fiber arts component.
Yes.
Which I think you're going to talk about next.
Yes. Okay, so I went to a lot of museums on all these travels, and I looked at a lot of artifacts, and I did a lot of research about embroidery because I knit, I sew, I'm not an embroiderer. But I wanted to see what are the clothing that people were wearing, what are the artifacts they used, what were they eating, what happened. And we stumbled upon this reconstruction of a hospital run by nuns in just exactly the beginning of the 17th century. And the most famous person was this apothecary, this woman apothecary. And as my husband Barry went through, being the ER doc that he is, he just, went through all these. He says, "Oh my God, this would kill someone if they gave me, So it was, but the herbs and the items that were in there, it was fascinating to do that. We went to Lyon and we found a a shop where, an actual workshop where they made silk tapestries using 17th and 18th century looms and silk material, and they were just gorgeous. They were beautiful. So I just kind of really got into that particular thing. And then, of course, I looked at every kind of embroidery I could possibly find, and really got a sense of what that particular fiber art of the time was like. And then, and I've got a shout out to Sean Owen Cruz. Sean, if you're listening to this, and also all of the members of the Ann Arbor chapter of the Embroiderers Guild of America, because I decided, perhaps foolishly, to try to embroider the beautiful book cover that my cover designer, Lindsay Clayworth, designed. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to do this. What a fool's errand that was. But I got a lot of help from them and from my sisterhood of fiber artists here in Ann Arbor. And I did it. And if you did not see it on the back table on your way in, please catch it at the end of the program. I loved the experience, even if it was kind of a rookie level of perfection. And then I've got to also give a shout out to this book and Claire Hunter, who is a world-renowned scholar of embroidery. I owe her double thanks because this book, Threads of Life, The History of the World Through the Eye of a Needle, I just fell in love with the title. But also because I sent her a manuscript and she read it and wrote a beautiful endorsement for the book. So that was a real thrill for me. And then, because we never know where inspiration comes from or where it goes, I have one more thank you to my writing partner, Diane Davidson, who's here tonight, who did this felted bowl using motifs from the cover of the book and gave it to me as a gift, and you can see that back there as well. So now,
So, Barbara,
Yeah.
the embroidery plays a key role in the book, and I think you should tell the audience a little bit more about how that worked. What's the whole deal with the embroidery here?
So Claire Hunter does an extraordinary job of talking about how embroidery functioned, not just for decorative purposes, although that was clearly an important part, but also as a way, especially for women, to signal, to symbolize. And also it was used politically, banners and pieces of clothing and other artifacts. You could signal, and remember, this is a time when people were not all literate. So sometimes it signaled to people who wanted to know about danger or wanted to know about safety. And that's how I assigned to Isabela. That was her job, was to signal through her embroidery from banners and head coverings and gloves and so forth, different symbols of safety or danger on this network. But she also loved to embroider. I mean, she started out by embroidering items for the priest in the church. And so the history of using embroidery to signal, Mary Queen of Scots is probably one of the more famous examples, and Claire Hunter talks about this. You know, she would embroider beautifully, especially when she was in captivity, and she would send it to her lovers. She would send it to people who supported her as opposed to Queen Elizabeth, and she used her embroidery to communicate when she wasn't allowed to communicate otherwise because she was imprisoned. So that's just one example.
Yeah, I think we should open it up for questions. You haven't read the book, but you'll be very excited to do so. I would just say to you that there were some things in the book, Barbara, that I thought I kind of knew this story, but maybe you didn't know as I didn't know. The Inquisition, this book takes place 100 years after kind of the height of the Inquisition. And what I hadn't really understood was that the Inquisition continued on. It wasn't enough that you'd converted from being Jewish to being Christian. It was you were being pursued because the Catholic Church felt that there was a way to go after people who'd converted, the conversos, and who might be hidden still in a hidden fashion be practicing Judaism. So they went after the main characters in your book are people who've already converted. And in fact, Isabela considers herself Christian and a very devout Christian. This is a coming of age story for her. In what way?
Well, just to follow up on what you're saying about the Inquisition. So, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but also Isabella and Ferdinand said in the Decree of Alhambra that Jews and Muslims have to convert or leave. That was the beginning. So many converted, many more left. So they left, they traveled to the New World, they traveled to elsewhere, but a huge number of them went over the border, the long border between Portugal and Spain, into Portugal. The Inquisition nominally was there, but the Portuguese were way too busy running around the world exploring and doing economic business and trading to worry about imposing the Inquisition, and they made very good use of the Muslim and Jewish finances and education and all kinds of things in order to help them. So they were not interested until 100 years later when a marriage between a prince and a princess between Portugal and Spain resulted in a very brief period of time of Portugal being under Spanish rule, and that's when the imposition of the Inquisition became more challenging. And that is approximately when my book takes place. So, and it's important to know that the Inquisition was not canceled until, I think, 1830-something.
1834.
1834.
I looked it up.
Yeah, you looked it up. 1834. So, and it's also the case that the Inquisition did not start in 1492. It started in the 12th century, but it became as challenging as it did after 1492.
Ironically, by Isabella of Spain.
There you go. And I had some thoughts about naming this book Isabella's
Isabella.
Way, but then I saw Queen Isabella of Portugal, and I went,
All right, questions from the audience? Yes.
We have a.
Good.
I'm going to come with the mic just because we're.
Monica. That's Monica, isn't it?
That is Monica.
Yes.
Another historical note, we went to Colombia, South America at one point, or Central America, I forget where it was, and they had a whole building in which the Inquisition resided in the New World,
Yes.
and you could tour it. So it was everywhere.
Yes.
And we lived in Brazil, and it was very active in Brazil too, especially in the northern part of Brazil.
And another point of history, I've been doing my own genealogy for decades, and my family also came from Gerona. But in the year 1240, they fled Spain to France, and it was because there was a Muslim, Alvarades, a name I can't pronounce, but there was an invasion of Moors at that
Yes.
time, and that was in the 13th century, way before this, and people had to leave Gerona then also.
Yes.
Yeah, they got as far as Tours, I think, in France.
Right. Tour.
Yes.
Right.
Who
Exactly.
Who else?
Roland the something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Song of Roland. What others? Others? Comments? Yes.
I got to read the book early. Thanks. I was fascinated by the fact that one of the bishops, Bishop of Tours, I believe it was, decided to send Padre Alvarez back home because he was just rousing the rabble. And did you come across in your research more indications that in various places the church did not find it as valuable to persecute individuals as to let communities grow and pay their required taxes?
All the time. And this was in Toulouse, and it was also because Anna Martel Girondi was able to assist the young friend of this bishop and do some good healing. And I want to point out that not only was this religious issue around the Inquisition an issue, but one of the main characters is a dye maker and a healer, and she's one of the allies of Isabela. And to be a healer and a woman
Yes.
was witch-worthy. And that was, talk about becoming a heretic, because it's God's will what happens to you. And so she was constantly under the threat of being considered to be a heretic as well.
I also really like the fact that you hinted around the idea that part of what the authorities were after was to stop the brain drain of specialized merchants, craftspeople, and others who contributed to the culture, contributed to the nation.
Yes.
And there's some indication that that's what led over centuries to the decline of the Inquisition. It was not profitable.
Good point.
Well, Barbara, I don't see some too many questions forthcoming, or do I?
Is there?
Oh, good. Okay. Well,
We've got
from the very back
question
of the
there,
room.
and then another one here.
Can you talk a little bit more about some of the symbolism on the cover? I know there's a lion and two symbols in particular that are in the bowl. Would love to hear more about what's on the cover.
Yeah. So the lion is the Lion of Judah, which is a symbol that in Christianity became later a symbol of Christ as well. And so it kind of works both ways. The pomegranate is a symbol of fertility, of abundance, and that is a symbol that is very common in Iberian embroidery, and also it's very traditional in Jewish symbolism. The iris is a symbol of fidelity and loyalty. What else? Yeah, the compass. Thank you, Diane's favorite. The compass is sort of an indication of the fact that there's a lot of traveling going on.
Counting your block that you had during COVID. Counting your block that you had during COVID, how long did it take you to do your research and write the book? And also, during the course of your writing, did it just pour out of you, or did you have writer's block along the course of writing it?
Great question. So I started, like I said, Isabela came to me in 2011, and I literally told her to wait, and she did. So I was finishing, I was in the middle of writing Even in Darkness, and then I knew I had Hard Cider, in the pipes. So I wrote those two books, and Hard Cider was published in 2018. So I would say I started writing Isabela 2017. And I just started, I call them snippets. I just started writing certain things, and in 2017 I made the second trip. I couldn't make the third trip until 2022, so there was a bit of space in there, but it worked because I'd really gotten a lot of information, and I was able to do a lot of writing during COVID because I'd had had 2 trips there so far. But yeah, I'm not a quick writer. And people ask me about writer's block all the time. I don't get writer's block, but I am a slow writer. And people ask me, do you just sort of expel a first draft? I don't. I worry over every single sentence. I'm a, what is it called? A pantser, not a plot. So by the seat of my pants.
Barbara, there's a lot of rich detail in the book on, as you mentioned, the pharmaceutical, the chemical things, but also of the fiber art stuff. I've known you for a long time. I didn't know you knew all this, so you must have been learning it. And I guess my question is, did you farm it out to anybody that you think knows a lot about these subjects to find out whether what you were saying was
okay,
on?
So 2 of my fiber artist buddies are here tonight, and they will tell you that I certainly begged and pleaded. They're both embroiderers, so they both really helped me. And then Friday Sit and Stitch, the Embroiderers Guild, every Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning, they get together, and that's where it started. I actually met a representative here in the library when the Fiber Arts Fair that they had here, and that's where I met the Embroiderers Guild people, and they took me in and helped me out. So I know a lot about, I knit and I sew, but I have never embroidered before.
Well, is there anybody in the audience who would like to say something about the embroidery and the fiber arts in the book? About
Well, Kay is a master embroiderer.
Okay, well, how about another shout out about that?
Well, I can. I'm in the unique position of having tripped over a love of samplers relatively late in life. I was an active member of the EGA here when I lived in Ann Arbor in the late 80s and early 90s, and work rolled over me like a wave, and I didn't embroider for several years. But I had started researching published books of designs that were done in Europe after 1527 is the earliest one I've really enjoyed, and up until about the 1620s. I belong to a group that researches things that our timeline officially ends with Queen Elizabeth. And this book captivated me in part because I kept thinking, where are those designs? Where are those patterns? What is this based on? Are there any surviving examples? I have the good luck to have been researching. Again, I got back to it, and I'm almost done with the sampler that's based on 26 designs published in that 100-year time period. So
That's cool.
I started looking at pictures while I was reading the book because she made it so engaging.
Thank you, Kay.
That's great. Other questions, comments?
One thing about when I was reading about Isabella's way was the way that she was finding her heritage, and she didn't really know necessarily about her Jewish background. I obviously haven't read the novel. I recently had conversations with several friends today who have had grandparents pass away, and they found out that their grandparents were survivors of the Holocaust, or that their family and their heritage was hidden from them because, as well at that time, people were terrified of being persecuted. Would you recommend that this is a novel to recommend to those friends that I have, and maybe that they can identify with Isabela in this way of learning about their heritage and something that has been hidden from them their whole lives?
Wow, what a great question. Yeah, I think so, because I spent a lot of time thinking about, agonizing over what would it be like. First of all, a 14-year-old in 1610 is not exactly, the exception being my granddaughter, who's the most mature 16-year-old I've ever met. But generally speaking, a 14-year-old in 1610 was actually considered an adult, a young adult. Even so, I posited that what Isabella's lost her mother to the plague. this life, this wonderful life, modest but, you know, successful life of her parents and her is just ruptured by this insidious danger that's been kept from her precisely so that she could honestly say that she is a devout Catholic, she goes to church and so forth. And it's really only in pieces that she begins to piece it together. And there is one part of the book where she goes into a rage that this has been kept from her, that she was not considered to be she's adult enough to carry on the family business. She's adult enough to, you know, be part of this network, but not adult enough to be told about her own. And I really do address that directly. So, I mean, you know, your friends might be a little bit older than she is, but in terms of that difficulty, perhaps it would be helpful.
You know, Barbara, there's always a question that's asked of every author, and we've got a nice intimate group here. Did you know where this book was going to go when you started it, or did you have to kind of make it evolve as you went along?
This was a book that I knew what was going to happen at the end, but boy, did I not know exactly how it was going to end. You know, am I right? Did I spend, you know, anguished hours saying, you know, what would be this? And, you know, my buddy's over here saying, you've got to up the ante here. You've got to turn the screw. So no, I did not know. And that, it was both terrifying for me because, you know, I like to sort of know where I'm going. But it was also just a joy to experience that creative effort in a way that I had done some of in my other books, but not like this. So this was a new kind of writing for me, and it was wonderful.
You get up early in the morning and start writing and then say, I've gotten a certain amount done each day?
God, no. So I do get up very early in the morning. But no, I do not have a specific, you know, people frequently ask me that, you know, do you have like a pattern of writing? And the answer is no. I will say that the place that I write the best is at our home in northern Michigan, looking out on Lake Michigan, and I can get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and sit in my chair with my computer, and the next thing I know, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That happens to me up there. And I'm not one of these people that can take 20 minutes and write a little bit here and a little bit there. I have to sort of get into the headspace, and I need a couple of hours of time. But then it's great when it happens.
It's wonderful. I think yes, question. Let's pass you the microphone.
Barbara, this is great. I was very interested to hear about your sensitivity with, because you had worked with Jewish Family Services.
Yes.
And we are all very, very interested, in immigration, no matter what side of the aisle you're at. Was there anything in particular that you put into the book about the immigrant story?
Anything in particular I put into the immigrant story? I guess the answer is that, and this goes back to something I said earlier, which is that I'm always interested in the unexpected, both in terms of problems that arise and also in terms of unexpected allies. And I guess I wanted this not to be only a one-sided story. I wanted her to experience the persecution, but I wanted there to be unexpected allies and enemies. And I think that's something that's really sorely lacking in our public discourse now. And as I said earlier, I had no idea when I started writing this book what it would be like to actually bring it out in the political climate we have now.
So, I mean, that's something that's having read the book a while ago and seeing what's happened since I read the book. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Now.
Having read the book a while ago and now seeing what's happening now in our country, our own Inquisition, so to speak, I want to make just one comment and then ask you a question. The comment I would make is if I was still teaching Facing History myself and ourselves, if I was still teaching that, this would be a book I would use because it's a great way of teaching about the Inquisition and about the immigrant story and being a refugee. And whenever I read something like this, I think, oh, I wish I were still teaching, but not really, but you know. And the other thing, Barbara, is I remember you talking about this book back in the day when you were taking those trips. I do remember that. So what I haven't asked you is, what's next?
Oh, I was worried someone was going to ask me. And my own Kathy Ruth asked me. This is the first time in 20 years I don't have a book like, begging to get out. However, I do have 2 or even 3 smaller projects that could turn into something bigger.
I recommend a bicycle trip.
Yeah, man. But I'm also getting older, So I have one project for sure I know that I'm going to be working on this year. But it's, one of the things people don't realize is, after you write a book, then there's the hard part, which is getting it out into the world. I love talking about it, as you might be able to tell. But doing all of the arranging of all of that is a lot of work. So that's what I'm focused on now. But I do have 2 projects that I know that are smaller projects. And we'll see. If there's another book, we'll see. Oh.
I just wanted to go back to the comment about and the question about writing style. And some authors use a system where they plot everything out in great detail, such as the Harry Potter books and other books where everything is laid out in great detail before the writing even starts. Other authors...
Such as yourself?
No. I use the other style. The other style is where you have one thing in mind for me it was that somewhere along the line of this book there would be a woman who had a false pregnancy, and that was all I had. And Barbara just had the little seamstress and how she was going to end up. And so that's a totally different writing style. And I always thought that a really good writer was able to switch between the 2 modes depending on what the needs of the book are. And Barbara did that. So I would like to congratulate her on being a
How about a little congratulations?
Oh, thank you. We had another question over there.
Thank you for this beautiful presentation of not only the book, but your life history and your journey writing the book. I was curious if you could share a little bit more about how you accounted for the differences in the landscape between your bike journey and Isabela's time period. And I also, maybe unrelatedly, wanted to know what you think your grandmother might think of this text.
Wow. So, one of the reasons that I love bicycling is because you're really out there in the countryside. And so I really did get a sense, and I know that, some of the cork trees that you go through are hundreds of years old. And I know that there were cork trees in the 17th century as well. And quite a number of the cities that I visited had city centers or areas that were built in the 17th century or even earlier. So I did get a sense, if you sort of subtract the glass windows and stuff like that, I did get a sense of it, and I really tried to pay attention to just that exact thing of, and try to imagine what would this have been like in Lyon. What would it have been like, because I wrote it this way, when instead of there being buildings all the way down to the river, what if there were fields around the river, and then the castle where it was built, on a hill a little bit ways away. So yeah, I did pay attention to that. And so I tried to imagine, and then that's where the museums were helpful, because you could see landscape paintings and paintings of towns that, were well labeled. So I did do that kind of study also.
Your grandmother.
My grandmother. So my mother is here this evening, and what would my grandmother have thought of this book? Wow. My grandmother thought everything I did was wonderful. So, of course, no, she wasn't a big reader. So, my mother thought it was wonderful. Does that count?
All right, I think we should bring it to a close. The books are on the back, and the book signing is going to be over here. So
Yes.
I recommend that we adjourn to the back of the space. Schmooze with Barbara, and
Thank you
Barbara,
all
thank you.
so
Yeah.
much for coming. This was just a love fest.